problems with the vehicle, and how to fix any problems that there might be. We should go over the replacement parts that you definitely should have on hand, as well as some other replacement parts that would be recommended, and then also going to go over the upgrade parts that I recommend. Now again, being that this vehicle is the carbon fiber version, I will be covering the upgrade parts for the carbon fiber version. Those who have the aluminum, the same upgrade parts will apply, but there will also be other upgrade parts that you should probably consider getting. For example, the carbon fiber front and rear shock towers. There are numerous parts that you could get to upgrade, but again, for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to cover the upgrades that I recommend for the carbon fiber version. Starting with the replacement parts. Now, you should definitely have replacements for the front lower suspension and rear lower suspension. And you'll notice that I'm recommending the plastic ones and not the aluminum, and I will get into that in a bit. But for replacement, and for both the aluminum and the carbon fiber, I recommend getting the replacements of the stock parts, and I will give all the part numbers. I will also have all the part numbers listed in the video description, but to save some time, you'll notice that pretty much all of the Rlaarlo part numbers for the AK-917 start with R100. So I'm just going to reference the last 2 digits. So in the case of the front lower suspension arm, it's part 31, and for the lower rear suspension, it's part 32. You'll also, highly recommend it to have replacements of the drive shafts. For the front, it would be the front steel CVD part 67, and for the rear, the dog bone part 68. Now, that being said, and I have not tried this yet, I do need to measure, but I have a feeling that instead of using the dog bone in the rear along with the axle stub, you may be able to replace both of those with the steel CVD. And if it is possible, I would obviously recommend using the steel CVD in the rear over the dog bone and axle stub. You're also going to want to have replacement hinge pins. So the suspension hinge pin set, part 56, these are the 4 hinge pins that hold the lower front and rear to the chassis, or basically to the A, B, C, and D blocks. You're also going to want to have the steel pin set. These are what holds the upper suspension arms, and this is part 89. It also would be recommended, this is kind of like in between highly advisable and recommended, to have the steel center drive shaft set. And if you have the aluminum chassis, which comes with the aluminum center drive shaft, you might consider replacing it with the steel. There is an additional part that you'll need that I'm not mentioning here, but again, just because I am covering what is on the carbon fiber version. Also, you might want to consider having the suspension mount inserts. Now, I know that sounds like a strange one, but in a crash in other vehicles, both mine and especially ones I've seen from other people, the steel hinge pin has actually pushed right through the plastic insert. So I definitely recommend having these on hand as well. Now, some replacements that I would recommend having on hand, for example, the servo turnbuckle and the steering turnbuckles. If the stock ones get bent, you're going to want replacements of these, and those are parts 21 and 20. And then also the turnbuckle for the rear upper suspension arm, which is part 22. Now, for those who don't want to deal with having to put them together and measure, at least for the steering and the servo turnbuckles, they do also offer the pre-assembled, which would be part 18 for the servo links and part 17 for the steering links. That's just for those who don't want to have to deal with putting them back together, measuring them. The cost difference is not all that much. So, that's pretty much it for the replacement parts. Now, for the upgrade parts, I definitely recommend replacing the upper suspension arms, both front and rear, with the aluminum ones. And those would be parts 139 and 135, and these are actually, so it's R10 references the 917, the last 3 digits references the actual part numbers. Now, the reason I recommend the aluminum on the upper suspension arms, but not the lower, is because the lower suspension arms actually act as part of your suspension. They will flex a little. There is much more force to the lower than the upper. You don't want to prevent that flex by going with the aluminum. If you just want a shelf queen and you want bling, by all means, go ahead, get the lower aluminum suspension arms. But for those who actually are going to be running it, The upper aluminum, yes. The lower aluminum, no. Stick with the plastic on the lower. And again, it's because of that flex. Your also highly recommended upgrade, front and rear, is to get the front and rear uprights or steering hub. They're even calling the rear a steering hub. Technically, it's a rear upright. The front is steering hub or steering knuckle, however you want to put it. Those are parts 145 and part 143. And again, I should mention these are all of the orange. So all of the aluminum parts, they are available in orange as well as red. I'm covering the orange because obviously the vehicle that I have is the orange and blue, so all of the aluminum parts are orange. But again, everything available in orange is also available in red. Another highly recommended upgrade, and these you will need to get 2 of them, are the gearbox support, commonly referred to as a bulkhead. That's part 147. I think the red ones are actually 1 digit lower, but don't quote me on that one. These are going to be a lot more stable than the plastic ones. This is what really holds your differential. These are what holds your differentials inside the gearbox. This is what holds all of that. So you definitely want to have the aluminum gearbox support or lower bulkhead. Another thing would be the adjustable motor mount. This is part 151. It allows for greater adjustability compared to the stock aluminum one. So, you can see just by the number of screws, in here, you can see that it's going to be held more securely. So highly recommend going with the adjustable motor mount as opposed to just the standard aluminum one. The stock servo horn does seem to be pretty good, but pretty much almost always want to go with an aluminum one. I always recommend aluminum because there's not going to be any flex. It's going to be just much better all the way around. So part 126 for that. Now, speaking of the servo horn, you may want to upgrade your servo as well. Now, if you want to stick with the Rlaarlo branded products, this is what they offer, and it's part RD10007. That does not mean you have to stick with the Rlaarlo servos. It is a standard size servo. If you want to go with ProTech or Futaba or Spectrum or whatever else, Power HD, I highly recommend Power HD servos. They are outstanding and the prices are extremely reasonable. Also, Power Hobby, their servos are extremely good. Another highly recommended one would be from A-Main. They're their ProTech brand, and they also have an Eco, I forget the name, but lower priced. They're all outstanding. The great thing about the ones from A-Main are that if there's a problem and they need to be exchanged, you contact A-Main and exchange is super easy with them. Upgrading your servo is probably going to be highly recommended. Now, if you have the carbon fiber chassis, you're definitely going to want to protect that chassis. The aluminum ones don't need as much protection, but the carbon fiber you definitely want. So these, it's part 026 for the one that I believe is for the aluminum chassis, and it's part 027 that would be for the carbon fiber chassis. However, from what I understand, these are a bit on the thin side. So you may want to purchase multiples. Alternately, what I would recommend, if you have a Cricut, for example, buy one of these. Use it to create a template so that you can cut out your own using a Cricut of a thicker material. But again, you definitely want to protect, especially if you have the carbon fiber. You saw in my previous video how it's just slightly scratched up. And that's just after the first 3 packs. So do yourself a favor, protect your chassis. Another thing would be replacing the wheel hexes. Now those, the ones that it comes with, they look nice, they look like brake discs, but there's really nothing great about them. I've already removed the calipers and I will be replacing the hexes themselves. Now these hold on in the exact same way that the stock ones are. The pin is through the axle and they just rest onto it, and it is the wheel nut and wheel itself that pressure applied to it holds it on. What I typically recommend are clamping style hexes. They still utilize the pin, but over here, they'll have a grub screw that goes in from the side and locks it to the axle stub. X-ray, I know they're a little on the expensive side, but the quality is outstanding. And best of all, the grub screws that they include do not strip out like some of the cheaper ones. So, I definitely recommend wheel hexes. This one is part 074, or like I said, do yourself a favor and get the clamping style. Now, a lot of us are going to be replacing motors. If you want to stick with Rlaarlo, they do have a variety of motor choices here. And I'll scroll down here, you can actually see the specs. So if you want, pause the video so you can actually read the specs of each. Now, it should be noted that these are not censored motors. Even though these motors are upgrade over the stock motors, these are not censored. They definitely will perform better, but compared to something from Castle or Hobbywing or say TP Power, if you really want to spend some money, but also get probably the highest quality. Just an idea. I'm not going to give the part numbers because it's all right here. Now, something I think is a little controversial. Roz has already taken note. Raj Shefrin, for those of you who are familiar with him, he is one of the kings of speedrun vehicles that is also willing to share information. Because there's a lot of speedrunners that will not help others. They don't want to take a chance of losing out. But Roz, he shares information. And when he saw these, he noticed all these veins. You know, it's hard to see it here, but if you look, you see the veins that are indented in, machined out. The design is almost a direct copy of his design. And he sells his products on Amazon. You know, what makes this so controversial is not only that they copied his design, but there's no cross piece. This actually just bolts to the body. So as I had mentioned, it can flex. It's going to flex in and out, and both sides may flex differently. It will provide greater stability over just the body alone, but if mounted incorrectly, it could potentially lead to causing damage. So, you know, those that you want to take a chance, you know, go for it. It's part 152. But for those who want to find a better solution, good luck on finding it. Hopefully third parties will have something better sometime soon. Maybe even Roz, you know, he's playing around with the AK-917. So maybe he'll come up with something for it. Keep an eye on that. As for this one, you know, who knows? And then finally, we want to cover wheels and tires. These are the stock wheels and tires that come on the carbon fiber version. And they seem really good. You know, I have nothing negative to say about them. The tires themselves seem good, and they should easily last up to maybe 100 miles an hour. Beyond that, I don't know. But if you want to buy replacements of these, it's part 113. You can also get the wheels without tires, and they are part 112. And the nice thing is that they are available in a variety of colors. You got the black, you've got the gold, you've got red, you've got green, you've got orange. The orange would probably look really good on the orange and blue. I wish they had blue wheels, but that's okay. These look really nice. However, if you don't like the style of these, they do have another design, and these come pre-mounted with the tires as well. This is part 148. And honestly, I really like this design. Just over the stock, it kind of, you know, somewhat reminds me of the Snowflake wheels that were on the late 1970s Pontiac Trans Am. If anyone remembers Smokey and the Bandit, you know, that was the first year that those wheels came out. You know, I actually kind of like those. Now, if you want to go with the plastic wheels, those are available pre-mounted, set of 4, part 088, and they are also available without the tires, part 086. Now, I'm going to mention something about this. I mentioned it in the previous video about the spare tire. A number of the people running the pre-release version, they were talking about removing that to lighten the weight of the rear. And I had mentioned how you don't want to do that because that is actually what is providing stability of that whole rear piece. You remove it and it will move left to right, you know, a little up down, but more left to right. This is what is providing the stability. So what I recommend is get the plastic wheel set mounted. You know, realize you're not going to need them all, but use one of these to replace the aluminum wheel that is pre-mounted. That'll give you a spare one to use for actually on the vehicle should anything happen to any one of them. Now again, you know, should note that they are directional, so I don't know what direction that one is. It would obviously only be usable on one side. And then again, for those who want to go with foams or something and still stick with these types of wheels, this is part 086. If you're going to get foams and mount them yourself, you've got part 086 for the plastic ones, and you've got part 112 for the aluminum ones. There you have it. that is pretty much all of the upgrades and replacement parts that, at least I would recommend. Now, again, I mentioned at the beginning of this, I have no sponsorship to Rlaarlo or any other company. I do not have any financial gain in anything of what I'm recommending. I'm just honestly recommending what I think, you should need for the vehicle, both in replacement parts as well as upgrade parts. You can follow my advice. You're probably going to hear some of the same things from the others in regards to what parts they recommend. A number of them, especially those who receive the pre-release vehicles, they are sponsored to some degree. They may actually have some financial stake. You click on their links, they get a little portion back. That's how that usually works. Some of them mention that, some of them don't. Again, myself, I have no affiliation. I have no financial gain in any way. Mahalo, and until next time.